They're not talking about the best of them. They're just talking about the rest of them. Not the worst parts, but the best parts. This is the best of the rest.
Hello and welcome to Best of the Rest, the show where we take a second look at superhero movies that were poorly received upon release and only talk about what the movie does well. It's sometimes a challenge, but always a good time. And this week, we are talking Ghost Rider. I am joined, as always, by comic book historian Andrew Williams. You ready for this one, Andrew?
I am pretty ready for this. This is a movie that didn't really remember a whole lot of, so it felt like watching it for the first time in a lot of ways. So,
did you see it in theaters? Do you remember seeing it all the way through before?
I don't think I saw it in theaters, which is odd because it would have been 2007. I would have been in college. I would have had a car.
So why wouldn't you go see a superhero movie?
I don't know. I can only assume that maybe the reception kept me away. It's just something that didn't really jump out at me, which is odd because I'm a huge Nick Cage fan. Like I'll watch. I was with him all the way to Bangkok Dangerous. I was on the ride, so I really have no idea why it would have slipped past me. But that may be a lie. I may have seen it. I just don't remember it. But definitely a lot of this that was not ringing any bells when I was watching it.
I know for sure I've never watched it beginning to end until getting ready for this episode. I have certainly seen scenes before, maybe on TV or something.
Yeah, there were definitely scenes. There were definitely scenes that I remembered, but there was other stuff where I was like, not a chance.
You mentioned the reception, and yeah, this movie, it doesn't have a great reputation. It's kind of known for being one of the lesser adaptations, but we're going to get into it. We're going to talk about what the movie does well, because that's what we do here. We are a hashtag positivity podcast. It's catching on, Andrew.
It's going to be a thing.
So this movie comes out February 16th, 2007. A pretty weird time to release a superhero movie in February. That's usually like where studios are dumping their failed Oscar plays. It's not a great time for the box office. And
it's kind of that weird. It's that weird, like nebulous space between your winter blockbusters and your summer blockbusters. Like it's typically known as like a dumping ground. It's not usually when you release something that's high profile.
Yeah, but it paid off though. The movie had a sizable budget, 110 million, and it is a box office success, $228 million at the box office. But critics weren't exactly feeling it.
It's 26% on Rotten Tomatoes. Critical consensus is Ghost Rider is a sour mix of morose, glum histrionics amidst jokey puns and hammy dialogue. And they say that like it's bad. But
that's what I signed up for.
I was going to say, you're watching Nick Cage. But yeah, needless to say, this came and went. I mean, it made money. Obviously, there's a sequel to this that we'll probably also talk about.
There's a lot of parallels with Fantastic Four, I think, because that also was not warm. People didn't have a nice thing to say about it, but it made money and they made a second one. Same thing here.
Yeah. I mean, we're looking at a lower budget, obviously 110 million versus your kind of standard 200, 250 million tent poles today. So that lower budget obviously becomes the saving grace in a lot of ways, making this a little bit more successful than it otherwise might have been.
Yeah, but you think about people know who Ghost Rider is now because of these movies. But in 2007, I mean, I don't read nearly as much comics as you, but I'm familiar with a lot of comic book characters. This might have been my introduction to Ghost Rider. I'm not sure I knew who this guy was before the movies because he didn't have his own cartoon. Which is how I would have known about him. He wasn't in the Marvel versus Capcom games, at least not 1 and 2, which are the ones that I played. So I didn't know who this guy was. Where would you put him on like a tier? Like if, A tier is Batman and Superman, B tier is Iron Man before the movies. In 2007, where does Ghost Rider land?
He's a C at best. And that's probably straining. This is something where like I think the character definitely has like a cult following of like there's certain dedicated fans, and he's always been he's a popular character. Obviously, he's been around since the 70s,
which I was surprised. I learned when I was reading up about him a little bit because everything about this character screams 90s comic book movies to me. I would not have been surprised if he had came about in the 90s, because the 90s were a time, in the 80s comic books grow up because people that grew up with comics are now creating comics and they get a little bit more mature, and then that's where like the prices skyrocket for those early appearances of Spider-Man and Superman. And then in the 90s, comic book companies try to cash in on this, and they relaunch every book. All books get a new #1. They introduce characters. It's a first issue. Come and buy it, and you get like this big rush of brand new characters. And it's kind of a time of style over substance, to put it nicely. And that's what Ghost Rider seems like to me. Just he looks awesome. The stories maybe aren't great. I haven't read them, but that's just kind of the impression that I got just from looking at the character.
Well, there is a new Ghost Rider introduced in the 90s that I think very much flies into what you're talking about. Just that sense of like style over substance. Just we're looking for something kind of cool. I'm not really shocked that Ghost Rider is like, I think he's 78 or 72. Because you think about it, Evil Knievel, just on a base level, was his run, was the 70s.
Okay.
The late 60s, early 70s. So when you look at something like that, where like the idea of motorcycle stunts was really becoming like a pop culture thing, such as it was at the time, I think in that regard, the idea of doing like a motorcycle themed superhero was not really out of the question. Obviously, the idea of Ghost Rider precedes that. We'll talk about that a little bit later, but yeah, and that's the other thing too, is there are several different versions of Ghost Rider. There's Johnny Blaze, who obviously this movie is about. There's Danny Ketch, who is the 90s version, who also sticks with a motorcycle. And then you get a couple of different versions. And then obviously you get notably Robbie Reyes, who is the more recent version introduced in the 2010s that uses a car, not a motorcycle.
I resisted going down the rabbit hole when I was reading up on
Right.
Ghost Rider a little bit.
We don't
I
need to go
saw,
too much further, but yeah,
Cosmic
there's
Ghost Rider. There's a whole range of things, but Johnny Blaze, I mean, that's the name that I know. Again, from this movie, I now also know that from the FX pinball game Ghost Rider, which tells the story of Johnny Blaze. I love me some virtual pinball, but much like Hal Jordan being the Green Lantern that they chose to use for the adaptation of the movie, I gotta guess Johnny Blaze is the right choice. Even though there's a lot of them, he seems to be the most high profile, most iconic.
Oh yeah, sure, absolutely. He's definitely the quintessential Ghost Rider as far as most are concerned. The concept of Ghost Rider is all derived from him essentially. And so using him, especially when you got somebody like Nick Cage signing on, that makes perfect sense to me. It's the right way to go, I would assume.
This movie is both written and directed by Mark Steven Johnson, who wrote both Grumpy Old Men movies, which are comedies that I grew up with and I love. And I would not have guessed that that's the guy that would go on to do Ghost Rider.
His filmography is actually like very interesting because it was stuff that like I obviously knew he did Daredevil. Like I knew he wrote and directed Daredevil, but like some of the other stuff like Grumpier Old Men, Big Bully, which is the like Rick Moranis, Tom Arnold vehicle.
He wrote Jack Frost, which is a movie I love and I watch every Christmas, and it stars the greatest actor of our time, Michael Keaton.
And obviously Simon Birch, which is a movie that like I remember watching as a kid.
Huge missed opportunity of the marketing department for not putting on the Ghost Rider poster from the writer and director of Simon Birch. That would have been another 100 million at the box office.
I don't know how it's like when John Carter didn't hype up that Andrew Stanton did Wall-E. It's a comparable situation. It really is like
equally huge missed opportunities.
Yeah, equally huge. And then I didn't even realize how like much he's kept working in a lot of ways. Like I didn't realize he was a writer on Christopher Robin, and then like has been directing movies as recently as last year. So the guy's still been out there. So
good career, man.
Yeah, he's done all right for himself.
The movie was in production for a while, at least trying to get off the ground. There was a version that was written by David S. Goyer that Mark Steven Johnson rewrites. So much so that David S. Goyer is not in the credits of this movie, which I think makes David S. Goyer a ghostwriter.
I hate
Gotta give me some. Andrew, I've been excited to say that all week.
That's all right. A reluctant applause. But I can only assume that there just must have been a lot of changes at that point. Like, because there's rules for like, if you rewrite a script, there's a certain
percentage.
It's the same that like at a certain point, So yeah, for Steven Johnson to get sole credit means that he must have either changed that script, or when they said he rewrote Goyer's script, they
Very
were
little
just,
remained. Yeah.
yeah, like it's one of those things where like just a couple of lines of dialogue probably left. It's interesting to me that he's a writer and director, because that in superhero movies that becomes a very rare thing to have somebody
Yeah.
kind of have that writer director ownership of it. And like you get it with Spider-Man 3 a bit, because Raimi's a co-writer on all of that, and obviously like few of the MCU things have done that. I think Love and Thunder might be one of the first
Waititi.
ones, because he doesn't actually have writing credit on Thor Ragnarok.
Oh, okay.
But I think
James Gunn is
James
probably the
Gunn, yeah,
exception.
probably the exception. So yeah, but the fact too that like in the early 2000s, this guy did two completely different superhero movies, like did Daredevil for Fox and then did Ghost Rider for Sony. I actually think that's also in itself mildly impressive.
Yeah.
Just to kind of oddly do Daredevil and then be seen as somebody worth going to for Ghost Rider is, good for him.
Odds are we're going to be talking about him again.
Yeah. So more Mark Steven Johnson talk to come.
But today we're talking Ghost Rider, and let's take a look at the cast of this movie. And Andrew, as is tradition, we're going to start at the top, at the highlight of the cast, because usually in these movies, there's at least one actor that is single-handedly raising the bar. They're raising the quality of the entire movie, or perhaps just raising the role that they were given to a new level. And we like to give them what we call the Mark Strong Award. Andrew, who gets your Mark Strong Award today?
I'm going to go with an odd choice. I'm going to give it to Rebel Wilson as Girl in the Alley. I'm kidding.
I was. You had me there for a second.
I just watching it was very much. I was like, is that Rebel Wilson?
And I had the exact same reaction, and I mean, she does raise that is like, a nothing role that is very memorable because of what she does, though.
I thought about this long and hard because my brain obviously wants to default to giving it to Nicolas Cage, but I actually think I'm going to give it to Sam Elliott as Carter Slade / caretaker.
I'm going to go ahead and say that he also gets the Mark Strong Award from me, but Andrew, go ahead. Why Sam Elliott?
I think he's given the interesting, almost mentor-esque role to Nick Cage's Ghost Rider, because it turns out he is also a former / sort of current Ghost Rider. So he's
sort of the Old West version that rides a horse instead of a motorcycle.
There's a flashback at the beginning to a situation where you don't even know it's him, but this old Ghost Rider kind of goes against his orders from the devil, Mephistopheles, whatever name he's going by, and kind of rebukes him. And you find out later that Sam Elliott's character is that same guy. But he's the guy that helps Johnny kind of understand what it is, how his powers work, what he's dealing with. So he's given that kind of odd mentor, almost father-esque kind of role to kind of try to help Johnny acclimate to these powers in this situation that he finds himself in. And it's Sam Elliott. I mean, he could elevate a bottle of water. He's always great. He's got that gravitas. This movie's actually got a couple of, like, I don't know if you want to call them stunt castings, but this is obviously one of them, I think.
A little bit. It's not that Sam Elliott is like a huge star, but everybody knows who he is, and he's always playing some shade of Sam Elliott. I'm not going to say he's always playing the same character, because that sounds reductive and insulting, and not true. He brings something different to all the roles, but it's always Sam Elliott. It's always that mustache. It's that voice. He does some opening narration on this movie. I mean, top 5 narrators of all time. You got James Earl Jones, Sam Elliott. Who else would be up there? Morgan Freeman. And then the list starts running dry as far as like that elite level movie narrator.
Right. No, I agree. He's very good, and obviously he's no stranger to comic book films himself, having appeared in Eric Bana's Hulk as Thunderbolt Ross. One of the casting was I'll save that, because I'm sure again we're going to talk about that later. but yeah, so he's like I said,
He's in
not,
movies like Tombstone, The Big
oh yeah,
Lebowski, also playing a narration type role. I really like him in Thank You for Smoking, where he plays the
yes,
original Marlboro Man,
he's
and
very
he,
good
he
in
brings
that.
a lot to that role because in that movie he's dying of lung cancer. Thank You for Smoking. Go see it if you haven't done it. Great movie. But I
Yeah,
agree
but
though.
the Quick and the Dead, I mean, he's just whatever. And then he's even got a minor appearance like Butch Cassidy and Sundance Kid. Like and that's in the 60s. So this is a dude that's out there doing stuff and still doing stuff. I mean,
He pops up in Parks and Rec as
yeah,
the
like
other Ron.
the kind, yeah, the kind of bizarro Ron Swanson. And it's obviously he had a turn more recently on Netflix in The Ranch, just as like a sitcom type role. So yeah, that dude's out there and still out there doing stuff. Like obviously, I
I
think,
believe he killed Bigfoot, right? Was that him?
yeah, and Hitler.
Oh, whoa,
Um,
both.
both of
What is
them.
the name of that movie?
It's escaping me right now. But yeah, just a tremendous career, a tremendous body of work, and obviously, you bring him in to add some gravitas, and I think he does that in spades.
What I like about what he's doing here is, I mean, the concept of this movie is ridiculous and over the top, right? And so a lot of
Oh
people
yeah,
are going really big with their performance, but he's just being Sam Elliott. He's like, I don't
right.
need to yell, I don't need to scream. I just I need to take it seriously and relay that all this stuff is important and should be taken seriously. And it grounds the movie in a way that no other actor is doing in this movie.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why he gets the Mark Strong Award from me.
I agree 100%.
I anticipated giving it to Nicolas Cage going into this movie because, I mean, it seems like
He's Nick
perfect
Cage.
casting. It's
Yeah.
It's Nicolas Cage. Just be Nicolas Cage, and I'm gonna love you, and you're gonna make the movie worth watching. And I'm not gonna say
Right.
he's bad.
He's
Um,
not
it,
he's not
it
nearly
wasn't.
as over the top as I expected him to be, though.
Yeah,
And I don't mean
exactly.
that as a criticism, really. He's obviously this is an important character to him. Like this is something that he kind of sought out.
Which is cool. I love when actors that like the character and want to portray they pursue it.
Mhm.
I always think it's a lot of fun.
It is, and it's just, but yeah, he's just not. He's not as I was like. I'm like, we need to up the cage a little bit.
A little, yeah.
It's yeah, a little bit.
Well, let's dive into Nick Cage. So, I mean, this man's filmography, everybody knows who Nick Cage
Yeah,
is, right?
we know who Nick Cage is.
Makes movies in the 80s like Peggy Sue Got Married and Raising Arizona, becomes a true leading man in the 90s, leaving Las Vegas, of course, gets him a lot of critical acclaim, becomes a full-blown action star with movies like Con Air and Face Off, which is a top 5 90s movie for me. I mean,
Oh
Face
yeah,
Off,
Face Off.
I love that movie.
Okay,
Uh,
fantastic.
National Treasure. I know you love those movies, Andrew. I've
Oh
actually
yeah,
never seen them.
yeah. They're just fun, just adventure movies, kind of in a step down from something like Raiders of the Lost Ark, but just fun adventure movies. I'm also a huge fan of like Wild at Heart, which is the David Lynch film that he does in 1990. So I mean, like, I just Vampire's Kiss, Moonstruck, City of Angels. Everything.
2007 in particular is a huge year for the man. He releases, of course, Ghost Rider, also the movie Next, and National Treasure 2.
Yeah, big year. Nick Cage is Nick Cage. What more needs to be said? I think he's
Yeah,
doing.
I mean,
I think he's doing a decent job here. Like I said, I'm kind of surprised that he seems to be playing it so reserved most of the movie. Obviously, there are some themes here that he's playing with about kind of trying to not live in fear over what he's done, but
his approach is a
yeah.
little bit different. There's throughout the movie, a running thing is like this very dramatic point that is like it's Elvis Presley, right? And Nicolas Cage is like notoriously a huge Elvis fan, like a fanatic. The joke was that like he married Elvis's daughter just because he loves Elvis so much.
Yeah.
And I think he's trying to infuse a lot of like rock star stuff into the character, which fits. It makes sense. I like the point. It's a lot of fun.
And even as Johnny, like his stunt stuff, obviously that's pulling a lot from like the Evil Knievel's, and like the glasses he's got are obviously Elvis type sunglasses.
Yeah, I mean this, and he's wearing a jumpsuit, which is what Elvis has made iconic.
And Evil Knievel did the same kind of thing. But I think the thing that's just interesting to me is the idea that in 2007 people would be so gung ho to watch a motorcycle stunt.
He's got his own video game,
video games, like apparently plural, and like there's also like this weird little tick that he has where like he doesn't drink, he gets like martini glasses full of jelly beans.
I think that's so much fun. That
like it is.
I'm curious if that was in the script or if Nicolas Cage brought that. But yeah, instead of drinking
it's
alcohol,
it's literally
all of his crew and stuff is drinking. He's like, I don't do that. Alcohol
gives me a headache.
So
but like he legit, but it's not just that he's eating the jelly beans, it's that he's specifically putting them in like cocktail glasses. Like it's very specific, and it makes it feel like
alcohol
it was just
replacement.
Yeah. And so it's very, very fun touch where I was just like, that's fun.
I don't know what accent he's going for. I know they go to Texas at one point. I don't know if he's supposed to be from Texas, but it's how else do you describe besides just Nicolas Cage, right?
It's Nicolas Cage with an occasional Southern twang.
He's got a lot of quirks. He doesn't like watching himself. He doesn't seem too interested in that, but he watches very random things. And there's
a monkey program on the Discovery Channel that they were missing.
I wrote down the line. He says, "Mac, you touch the Carpenters or that chimp video again, and you got a scrap on your hands."
Perfect, beautiful. No, but yeah, like, and that's kind of a running thing where like they're in the trailer like driving home, and this guy skips past like a monkey thing on Discovery Channel.
That's what he wants.
Cage is like, go back to the monkey program on Discovery. I want to see the monkey. And yeah, it's just like weird little quirks like that, and you feel that maybe that's Cage just trying to like add some personality to it.
He's got a weird sense of humor. I also wrote down this line whenever he meets up with Eva Mendes again, his love interest, and he's like, "I wanted to talk to you. I haven't seen you in 56,000 years." Like,
yeah,
a hell of an exaggeration.
I was actually kind of surprised because this is the second movie we've watched where somebody plays young Eva Mendes.
That's true. Yeah. So let's go and talk about Eva Mendes. I think she does a great job. Hang on. Let me put some respect on the name. Mark Strong Award winner, Eva Mendes, because she got that award from me for her role in The Spirit. I think she's doing a great job here. I'll say it again. She is so much more capable of just being a pretty face. She's a lot of fun on screen. I love when she does comedies. I think looking at her filmography, she seemingly has retired from acting. She hasn't done a movie in about 6 or 7 years now.
She's married to Ryan Gosling, isn't she? So,
Yeah, my wife
just an attractive, just two attractive people that just not fair. It's not fair.
It's not.
It's just their children are just going to be a step above everybody else, and there's nothing they can even do about it.
They've got 2 daughters. One will be the first female president. The other one, I don't know. They're probably going to be an astronaut and
it probably will land on Mars. Now I'd go bigger. The first one on like Venus or something. But it's So yeah, it's interesting. She shows up as
Roxanne Simpson.
Despite Eva Mendes being 10 years younger than Nicolas Cage.
No, I love the movie starts off with both of them like young, and then Johnny Blaze ages 30 years.
And she ages like 15.
Yeah.
And I mean, part of that maybe is like, obviously we're led to believe that Johnny is doing a lot of reckless stunts. He's putting him in danger. Like hard in the sense that the motorcycle stuff, but then obviously like avoiding the rock star life at every other facet. Which is kind of a bit of a departure from the character. But yeah, she shows up. She has a very funny scene where she's at dinner, and
getting stood up by
Johnny Blaze, and so she just like keeps asking for wine and like keeps bringing it.
And that waiter is insane.
Yeah, right? So at one point, the scene kind of concludes with her like very clearly drunk at this point. She like grabs the waiter and she's like, "I'm pretty, right?" And the waiter's just like, "Eh." And I'm like, dude, what's wrong with you? Like, come on.
Also at dinner, I was waiting for this scene to make sense or have kind of pay off. But at one point, she pulls out a magic 8-ball and asks it a question.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And we don't see what it says. Then she spits it away. I'm like, wait a minute.
You just carry that with you all the time?
In your purse? Why?
I forgot about that. She pulls it out like casually too. Like it's not like just right out in the open in the middle of this fancy Italian restaurant. She's just shaking a magic 8-ball, seeing if Johnny Blaze is going to show up.
The note I wrote down was literally just 8-ball. What the f?
No, I had the exact same reaction.
Her entrance is incredible though, because the 2 characters knew each other when they were young. They haven't seen each other for a long time. Johnny Blaze is about to pull off a stunt, and then he hears a voice, and there's a big dramatic turn, and she's at the stadium, kind of away from the crowd. She's backlit. She walks in. It's just a fantastic entrance for Eva I imagine that happens like in her day-to-day life. Every time she walks into a room,
Oh yeah, I imagine it has to be.
there's music, backlight, everyone turns and looks.
That interview is so funny too because she like it's an interview where she asks him 3 questions and he answers none of them. It's like she's like, so what makes you want to do this? And he's like, you look great. It's just all responses like that. And then afterwards, she's like, thanks for taking the time. And even like, I did broadcast in college and I was just like, oh, terrible interview. Can't use that.
It drives me nuts though, because the stunt he's about to perform is jumping over a football field, and they specifically say from field goal to field goal. And multiple times they say it's a 300-foot jump. That is a 360-foot jump because it's 100 yards of the field, 10 yards for each end zone, 120 yards times 3. Did I do the math right? 360 feet.
Yeah. Well, no. Yeah, 10 yards. Yeah. So it's 300 feet plus 2 more. So it's 300. It's 100 and 120 times 3 is 360. Yeah.
Thanks for double checking my math. You're not nearly as angry about this as you should be, Andrew.
It's very well, and it's always odd because like he makes these changes to the stunt thing that apparently none of his team knows about. So like
I just asked these helicopters to fly in.
Yeah, like you did all that.
Cars.
Like you did all that on your own. Nobody knew about it.
That's
like,
his level of star power, man. When Johnny Blaze says he needs 5 Apache helicopters, you make it happen.
Yeah, apparently you do.
How about Wes Bentley as Blackheart? First off, I got to ask you this, Andrew. I do know the character Black. I knew Blackheart before I knew Ghost Rider because they're featured prominently in the Marvel versus Capcom games. And Blackheart is a very tall, demonic-looking thing.
Yes,
and in this movie, he looks like Wes Bentley. Yeah. So this seems to be like a pretty big departure from the comic counterpart. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. You get a little bit of that look at the end when like he absorbs all the souls. You get a little bit more
but
of like
he becomes a character called Legion. Is that a separate character? Or is that part of Blackheart's
play it
story?
Like a separate character where like he becomes this idea, but I think that's really that's more of a religious thing. The whole like we are Legion is just a very like there was a group in some New Testament accounts that were Legion, and it was just this group of damned souls, basically, for lack of a better way to put it. So anytime you hear somebody kind of do the we are Legion thing, they're kind of referencing that. So no, that's not a specific comic reference. That's actually more a religious reference. And my knowledge of biblical history is a little bit more spotty than my Ghost Rider history. So, but yeah, that's so no, they're definitely playing this a little bit differently. They're playing him a lot more like just kind of your standard movie demon. I have a human form.
So Wes Bentley, I know from American Beauty.
Yes.
And that's about it. Definitely his biggest thing he did before this movie. He's gone on to do plenty of credits to his name afterwards, but that's probably the most well-known performance of his career.
Yeah, obviously more recently he was in Interstellar. He was in Mission Impossible Fallout.
Some bit parts here and there.
Has some appearances in the latter seasons of American Horror Story, joining up with our alumnus Sarah Paulson. So he's been around.
As far as his role in this movie, I'm going to use the classic. He's doing what's asked of him.
Yeah.
He looks and he's dressed like he's a member of Avenged Sevenfold, and he just kind of delivered these hokey.
Yeah, these kind of very wooden, just very generic apocalypse stuff.
Nothing bad, not bringing down the movie or anything.
He's not bringing down the movie, but like he's got a very specific job that he is doing perfectly acceptably.
Let's talk about the character's dad. Peter Fonda plays
Fonda. This is the real stunt casting, but yes. Jesus Christ.
We'll get to that. Let me get this name out. He plays, as the movie calls him, Mephistopheles. Is that what they say?
Mephistopheles.
But it's Mephisto, right?
He's clearly
that's the common name in the comics.
Well, Mephistopheles is actually a name that's been used in the past for like an actual demon from German folklore is Mephistopheles, but he's very clearly supposed to be Mephisto. Mephistopheles, obviously, most notably known from the Faust legend.
Oh, of course, yes.
Yeah, some people know who Faust is. what's
Not our listeners.
you never know. You never know who out there might be familiar with German folklore. But no, Mephistopheles is like, so they obviously are changing that name. Mephisto is obviously that's the one more commonly
That's who he
tied
is.
to it.
And
But
that's who was revealed to be the real villain recently in WandaVision, right? Everybody knows that if you play Agatha all along, you play that song backwards, it says it was Mephisto all along.
Right. It's very clearly, it's
all the fan
obviously in
theories
there.
came true. Yeah.
Yeah, they all came true. Nobody left sad, and nobody had their hopes shattered. It was masterfully done.
But Peter Fonda, right? This is Tommy Lee Jones casting, right? We've referenced that a few times.
Peter Fonda is, obviously known for Easy Rider, amongst other things. Yuli's Gold later in the 90s.
I mean, a monster of the industry. His credits are insane. He's a writer. You named it. Obviously, son of Henry Fonda, the star of 12 Angry Men, which is like my favorite movie of the 50s, one of my favorite movies of all time. This whole family is like Hollywood royalty. So yeah, to cast him as the villain in
Ghost Rider,
yeah, you're kind of bringing some gravitas to the movie, like they did with Tommy Lee Jones in the first Avenger. That's kind of
it feels very similar. Obviously, he's got maybe 10 minutes of screen time. He's not really portrayed as the villain of the piece. That's definitely Blackheart.
He's usually standing still, delivering cryptic lines, and just being a presence.
Basically, yeah, standing around delivering cryptic dialogue. Yeah.
You got David Roberts as Captain Jack Dolan, and I only wrote this down for two reasons. One, I had to find out where I knew this man's face from, and he's in the Matrix sequels.
Yeah.
He's one of the captains of the ship. He's Niobe's new love interest. Man, I love those movies. They're not based on comics, but maybe one day we can talk about the Matrix sequels and how they are actually awesome. I also wrote down this name because he plays Captain Jack Dolan, which sounded familiar. A high-ranking police officer named Dolan. That's the name from The Spirit.
It is
Commissioner Dolan, and there can't be any relation between the two. The Spirit.
You would assume not. No,
but that's all. Nothing else to say about him. I recognize his face. I wanted to bring it up.
Oh yeah, I had the same thing where, like, I was like, I know him from something.
You already mentioned Rebel Wilson. She's fantastic scene. She's the first person that Ghost Rider saves from a bad guy, but then she shows up later doing an interview with the news station, and she's describing his flaming head.
She gets to that last, which I think is funny. Like, she goes and she describes he's lean, he's kind of like, she's describing him like a normal person for like the first 20 seconds, and then she's just like, oh, and he also his head is a skull that's on fire, and Eva Mendes is like, what?
It's really fun. This movie, in my opinion, never really dips into that yellow spandex moment. It never seems ashamed of its source material. It recognizes that it's ridiculous, but not like it doesn't make fun of it, which I super appreciate. And super. I can't imagine many people knew Rebel Wilson in 2007, which is why she had such a bit part. She's gone on to star in the Pitch Perfect movies, and
Bridesmaids obviously comes in 2011, which she has a bit part in as well. I think that was really probably the first stepping stone awareness thing that she got. Then obviously, 2012, she's in
she's in the Anne Hathaway movie,
The Hustle.
How could I forget?
Obviously, Jojo Rabbit. More recently, she's
great,
quite blown up. So it's just it's always interesting to see like people that go on to be very famous in these like small parts. But everybody, we all start somewhere. So
let's talk about this movie, Andrew. Let's talk about all the things that we liked. This movie tells the story of Johnny Blaze, a motorcycle stunt performer that makes a deal with the devil. And now, whenever he is summoned to do the devil's bidding, he becomes the supernatural being Ghost Rider. When the devil's son Blackheart attempts to overthrow his father, it's up to the Ghost Rider to stop him. That's the story this movie tells. And the first thing I want to know from you, Andrew, is when do you think this movie is firing on all cylinders? What is the high point? What is the best scene in Ghost Rider?
I think the first transformation scene is the peak. So basically the lead up is that he's like hyping himself up to go on his date with Eva Mendes because he's obviously, because of the mistake he's made, Johnny has apparently been kind of living his life very he's been very introverted. Obviously, he's been like researching the paranormal and like supernatural and like the
He doesn't want to get
otherworldly.
close to anybody because the stipulation of the deal with the devil is that the devil can call on him at any time. He doesn't even know
Right.
what that means, but he's worried if he gets close to somebody, gets called to do the devil's bidding, he's going to hurt someone in the process.
So he's not been doing. So he's been staying away from pretty much everybody being detached except from his motorcycle team. So he's waiting for a sign, and he sees Roxanne's reappearance as that sign. But the night they're supposed to go out and have dinner at that Italian restaurant, as he so nicely says,
Italian.
He basically he at that moment he is summoned by Mephistopheles to deal with Blackheart, who is trying to find this contract of Senvagaza, which will give him the power to unleash hell on earth, apparently. So he doesn't get to go to that dinner.
Control of like 1,000 souls or something.
Yeah. So that moment he gets summoned. So it's a very interesting sequence, very kind of Wolfman type transformation where like
this is where Nicolas Cage shines. This
is the one true moment in the movie.
No one can scream like Nicolas Cage.
This is the one like big moment in the movie where he really does go like full Nicolas Cage, and I think that's why it's the peak for me.
He screams and he goes, "Not the bees, not the bees," and I don't know why they put bees in this. No,
no, that's a different. That's the other Nicolas Cage movie where he takes a deal with the devil. But no, so obviously there's a big lead up to it where like he's on this motorcycle and it's like burning through the streets. Like you see that it's leaving, like it's melting the road and it's shattering all these windows and causing all this
like
damage.
Flipping cars.
And like he's just really going all out, and he finally like lands at this place and he gets off and like his feet are on fire and like he's kind of walking all stilted and like you see like the smoke coming out from under his thing. And then it's a fairly impressive set of effects as like his skin and face and all of that melts away to a skull.
Yeah.
And then it catches on fire and his hands turn into the bones and everything. And but like in that whole transformation, Nick Cage is just, that's when he goes like full Nick Cage. Like he is hamming it up. He is screaming. He's making all the noises. His eyes are going all crazy. Like he's in that moment. And then just obviously there's a bit fight scene that follows where you kind of get some of the hallmarks, like finds the chains and things like that. But yeah, that sequence of him turning into Ghost Rider for the first time, I think is one moment the movie does exceptionally well.
I agree 100%. It comes 42 minutes into the movie, so they take the time getting to this, but this is what everybody's been waiting for. If you were like a huge Ghost Rider fan going into this movie, what you're telling yourself is at the very least, I hope he looks awesome as Ghost Rider. I hope the Ghost Rider scenes are cool. And this movie delivers on that 100%. So like we can talk about whatever else working, not working, whatever. I think you at the very least are getting what you paid for when you go into the movie. And that's the most important thing that they get right. It's like, I don't know if you've seen the Dolph Lundgren Punisher movie from the 80s, but he's the Punisher. He's Frank Castle. You get the backstory. Never wears the skull. The most iconic part about the Punisher is that awesome logo on his chest. Doesn't do it. And it just blows my mind that you would adapt the character and not do like the thing the character is known for. And they nail it with Ghost Rider. So he confronts Blackheart there and his sort of gang of different demons for the first time. The powers are based on like the elements. Like elemental demons. There's the water one, the smoke one, earth one. But they knock him into like some chains and it hangs him. And then he pulls the chain down, lights it on fire, and that becomes his weapon. So it's kind of cool how they slowly like add to his arsenal and like his iconic look sort of builds over the course of the movie.
Yeah, like the jacket comes later. His original jacket is very normal, and then like he ends up in prison and he actually takes the jacket from somebody, and that's when it gets like the spikes and stuff on it. Yeah. He gets the gloves and everything. So there's these little moments throughout the movie where they build up his appearance. Obviously the motorcycle transforms into a very, very gnarly looking Ghost Rider motorcycle.
He's got a super cool voice. When I watched the movie, I was kind of thinking, once Nicolas Cage transforms into Ghost Rider, it's not really Nicolas Cage anymore. And I could not find out if he did like the mocap or whatever. I don't know if he's performing the Ghost Rider character, but obviously they're replacing his face and hands with a CG skeleton on fire. So it's not really him. And I always think that's funny whenever like an actor takes on a role and finally gets to play like a superhero, but not really. Like if you play the Hulk, you play the wimpy nerd, but whenever you're the Hulk, it's not really you.
Right. Yeah.
It's not like, Superman where you could actually pose like in the costume
Suit
and
and everything,
everything.
yeah.
So, but that is his voice. Because it doesn't sound like him. And I was like, oh, it's not even Nicolas Cage's voice, but apparently it is. So I looked up this interview from Mark Steven Johnson. He did back in 2005 while he's making the movie. And this is what he says. Things are going great on the Ghost Rider front. In fact, today I got to hear the Ghost Rider's voice for the first time. My sound designer is Dane Davis, who won the Academy Award for The Matrix and is a true genius when it comes to creating new sounds. To start with, Dane took Nick's reading of all the Ghost Rider's lines, filtered them through 3 different kinds of animal growls, played backwards, covering 3 separate frequencies, then played it through a mechanical volumizer before finally setting the whole thing on fire. It's fantastic. Picture a deep, demonic, mechanical lion's roar, and you'll get an idea of what this sounds like. One thing is for sure, his voice will shake the theater. Now he's playing it up a little bit. Obviously, he's kind of marketing his movie.
Yeah, he's selling his movie, but yeah.
But that process of getting to this voice, I mean, it doesn't sound like Nick Cage anymore, but it sounds super cool. A character's voice, a comic book adaptation is really interesting because you've never heard it before. You've
Right.
only read the character. So
you have it all in your head, but you never know what it actually. It's that kind of missing piece of when you're in a visual medium. It's like there's no notion of how it sounds, and so it shows they put in the work. They weren't just content to have it be Nicolas Cage's voice, just like do some kind of
which
Batman
would have been
thing.
Hilarious.
Yeah,
he just still sounded like Nicolas Cage, but
just like randomly Nick Cage's voice trying to sound all demonic and evil. But yeah, they put in the work, and I always like stuff like that because again, it's a small thing. We've talked about this plenty of times on the show before, but it's those little hints that show. Ultimate legacy of the film aside, there was effort put in. There was a conscious decision, a conscious motivation to be like, you know what? Let's actually try to think through this and actually make this something that's as cool as possible. Now, obviously, this is 2007. The CG itself, you could argue that maybe the technology was or wasn't there to different extents. There's actually still some really cool transitions in this movie, like when he does the Ghost Rider stuff. Like I said, that first transformation sequence is really
whenever
cool.
he transforms into Ghost Rider and back into Johnny Blaze, and his
that
flesh
scene
grows over his skull. It reminded me of Hollow Man. If you ever seen that with Kevin Bacon, and he's disappearing for the first time, you go through the layers of skin and muscle and bone. Looks really cool.
There's that scene right at the end, because at the end he gets in this big final fight, and he ends up in the light, but he has to go back into the shadows so he can turn back into Ghost Rider because the slim light makes him not able to turn into Ghost Rider. But towards the end, like Eva Mendes like puts a hand like on his face, and you see like his face like morph back to Nicolas Cage in real time, and it's that same thing where you see it all reappear, and that sort of stuff like definitely still looks fairly impressive. Like I said, obviously they'd be able to do it differently now. I've actually not seen how Robbie Reyes looked on Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., so I don't really have any barometer for it.
Does Ghost Rider show up there?
Yeah, they do the Robbie Reyes version, who's the one with the car versus the
motorcycle.
Cool. So I actually have no idea how they've potentially approached that more recently, especially a television versus a film. But yeah, I
think it looks good, and I think it holds. It doesn't take me out of the movie at all. There's like a close up of his skull head where it looks a little PS3-ish, I guess, but it's just so badass that's what overrides any shortcomings of the special effects.
The CG was never like, cool. Of all the points in the movie, I never had any issue with the CG.
Yeah, and you mentioned, that scene where he's driving down the street and flipping cars. Like, that's all practical. There's still plenty of like practical effects in this movie to really ground everything and pull it all together.
Yeah.
The last thing I want to say about that first transformation scene is, like I said, it comes in 42 minutes into the movie. That's the one scene I went back and rewatched before we recorded this because I enjoyed it so much. And it's under 10 minutes long, and that's counting from him transforming to him fighting Blackheart and the demons. And then he leaves there, and then he hears Rebel Wilson in trouble, and he goes and saves her from a mugger. And what he does to that mugger is super cool. He picks the guy up and he says, what's he say? Your soul is stained with the innocent.
Blood of the innocent. The blood of the innocent.
Super cool. And
very
then
Judge Dredd-esque almost. Like there were moments where he was like guilty, innocent, where I was like,
he sentences him on the spot in the street, and then he makes him feel. He doesn't kill the man.
Right.
He makes him feel all the pain of everybody that he's tormented, and that's just such a cool concept. And then he drives off to his father's, the cemetery where his father's buried. The sun comes up and makes him transform back into Johnny Blaze. So that 10-minute segment tells you everything you need to know about this character. You understand how he transforms. You understand his powers. You get some backstory. It only happens in the shadows at night, his transformation. It tells you everything you know about Ghost Rider. So like if I had never heard of Ghost Rider before and you showed me this 10-minute segment, okay, this is Ghost Rider, I would go, oh, I understand. He's the coolest comic book character ever. This is awesome.
I understand. He's friggin' awesome. Yeah. It's and that whole sequence, like you said, is very, very cool.
I love when he whistles for his motorcycle like it's a horse. He whistles and it drives up. It's a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Now, we touched on a little bit. The movie opens with a young Johnny Blaze and a young Roxanne Simpson. And they are obviously young lovers, but Roxanne's father doesn't approve of her dating a stunt rider, and they plan to run away together. And all in all, we don't see Nick Cage until 14 minutes into this movie. So the movie takes its time here. Like I was trying to follow the timeline because they are talking to each other. They decide to run away together. And he goes, hey, tomorrow at noon, let's meet back here and run away together. He goes home. His dad has hospital papers in the trash can that he reads and finds out that his dad has cancer. He goes to the garage to work on his bike to work through this. The devil shows up. He makes a deal with the devil. The devil says, I'm going to make your father healthy. The next morning, his dad is healthy. He's like, hey, I never told you I was sick, but I'm not sick anymore. I'm going to go do a stunt. He goes to his father's performance where he jumps his motorcycle, but wrecks and then dies. And then he drives by Eva Mendes, which is noon the next day. So his father had like an 8 a.m. show, I guess, to a packed place. 10
a.m. show, man.
I'm not making fun of the movie. It's very efficient. I mean, it tells you so much in those opening minutes. It works. You get a grasp on everything. The second time that he sees the devil, it's literally at a crossroads. He's driving his motorcycle and the devil's literally standing at, classic devil imagery, standing at the crossroads. And that's when he tells him like, hey, I'm going to call on you later for a favor. Don't get close to anybody. And so that's why he doesn't meet up with Roxanne. And he goes off to live this life as, the most awesome
person ever. Yeah, that whole sequence, like you said, so we're keeping Nick Cage kind of in the back for the first 15 minutes of this movie, and getting a lot of information in those early scenes. We also have we didn't mention this during our casting, but Brett Cullen making a brief appearance there as Barton Blaze. Obviously, I personally know Brett Cullen mostly from The Replacements.
Is he the actual NFL star, the one that makes fun of him?
He's the actual quarterback. He's
the one that's on strike.
The one Keanu replaces. So and obviously he more recently was Thomas Wayne in Joker.
You know who else we didn't talk about in the casting is Donald Logue. Yeah. I love this guy. Because
if he had more screen time, he probably would have been my MVP. He's just not in it enough.
Much like Sam Elliott is always a shade of Sam Elliott. This guy is always, he's got this, he needs the shave, he needs a haircut, he just rolled out of bed. He's made a career out of that look and that character.
His hair in this one actually is fine. He's got like a nice little flat top going. But no, like if he had more screen time, I have no doubt he would have been my MVP of this movie. He would have gotten my Mark Strong award for sure. He's just only got like 6 or 7 minutes.
They do him dirty with it. He gets killed by Blackheart
very unceremoniously.
And then like Johnny Blaze shows up. He's like, oh, Mac. And then
Mac. And then like runs right past him. I was like, dude. He literally had whole conversations where he was concerned for your safety, and this is how you do him.
I could not give him the Mark Strong award. Like I said, he's not in the movie enough, but there's a scene of him playing the video game on the tour bus.
Yeah.
I hate actors playing video games in movies because if you've ever played a game ever, what they are doing to that controller is not how you play a video game. They're just like mashing every button.
Yeah.
Paul Rudd is the worst actor playing a video game in a movie ever. It's in I don't know, Knocked Up or The 40-Year-Old Virgin, one of those movies.
Yeah, one of those, yeah.
And he's like, he's literally like smacking the buttons with it's like nobody does that.
It's the one thing in movies that always drives me crazy is when people are playing instruments and they very clearly don't even look remotely like they're not synced up at all with the music they're actually supposed to be playing, but they also aren't playing in any semblance of what looks like they look like they're an alien that like got told how to play an instrument versus actually knowing how to play it. That's why one of the movies I love is That Thing You Do, because they all knew how to play that song for real, so that actually looks genuine. But yeah, the video game is a very similar thing where it's like, I guess showing people just playing like they normally would doesn't look interesting because they just
Not
be
at
sitting there
all.
like in silence, so they just exaggerate it, but it always does look ridiculous.
Even in the most intense games, like shooting games, you're not constantly pushing buttons, so it doesn't play well on screen. I think the thing that most people will complain about in this regard is like when people drive in a movie because they're always like turning the steering wheel left and right even when they're going straight.
No one drives this way.
No, but the way people actually drive is very boring, and you would just be sitting there. So you're just playing to the camera. That's all it is.
Right.
I get
it's all
it,
visual.
It still bugs me.
It is. No, I completely agree.
His dad dying. I shouldn't be laughing. Hang on. That wreck though.
It doesn't look that bad.
Yeah, I'm like, are you sure he can't just stand up and brush off? It's slow motion, so you know something bad is happening. Right. He's going through the hoop of flyer, and he's a little bit crooked as he goes through. And then we don't see what actually happens. He's laying on the ramp he's supposed to lay on. So. There's no blood or anything, so I don't really know what happened. But like everyone knows, like right away, like, oh, this isn't good. But Johnny Blaze's wreck looks incredible,
gnarly as hell. Yeah,
so awesome. So that one, whenever he's landing, he flips over his handlebars. His helmet, the shield, hits his front tire and shatters, and then he falls to the ground and rolls. I legitimately don't know how they did that, because if it's CG, it looks incredible, but I don't know how they do that.
You poor man.
I hope they've got paid a lot of money for that, but it looks awesome, and the movie knows it looks awesome. They show it 2 or 3 times, and I was with it every time. But I would be fascinated to learn how they actually did that, because it looks rad.
It does. There's a lot of the motorcycle stuff in this movie looks pretty cool. They definitely put in the work on that part of it as well, which, motorcycle is Ghost Rider's thing. You would certainly hope they would, but yeah, it shows. There's
that fun scene when he's catching up to Eva Mendes on the highway, and he's driving up beside him and doing a bunch of tricks on his motorcycle.
Yeah.
And they brought in like a stunt performer because someone's actually doing it. It never looks too bad though. I mean, I think I noticed one shot where they put Nicolas Cage's face digitally on the performer, but it looks good.
I think the only one where I think I noticed, when the van stops just short of him, I think that's not Nick Cage, because that face looked a little off. But no, otherwise, yeah. So, and obviously, you still got to have shots of Nick Cage on the motorcycle doing all that. So they're again, Nick Cage he's dedicated, and it shows.
You mentioned those guys in the jail that he steals the jacket from.
Yeah.
He gets thrown in jail, and I'm kind of, obviously there's going to be a fight, but I'm like, what are these guys going to be mad at him for? He's like a celebrity, and they're like, hey, I paid to watch you jump and you didn't crash. And
he's become so known for crashing that they're mad he didn't crash.
I wasn't sure.
Not lost money, not lost a bet, not hurt by this guy. I'm just slightly annoyed that you didn't do the thing I wanted you to. It's like it'd be like beating up like Jason Segel in prison for the ending of How I Met Your Mother. Like it's like that show ended real bad, Jason Segel. Now your time is up.
Andrew, I had no idea where you were going with that when you mentioned Jason Segel. That is the most what? you know what the scene in Ghost Rider reminds me of when he gets beat up in prison? Jason Segel and How I Met Your Mother, and that disappointing finale.
That literally just came to me right now. I was looking for
Andrew.
I was looking for some totally innocuous thing, and that's what came to mind. So that's the place I'm in. But yeah, no, like that whole scene is just very straight. Then there's that one kid in there who's like, guys, leave him alone, and like at the end he judges him as innocent, and then the kid passes out anyway. Which makes sense. I probably would have too.
That was a fun scene. Anytime he's Ghost Rider, anytime he's transforming, I'm having a good time with the movie.
Oh yeah, they're leaning into it.
The effects by and large look awesome. He looks awesome as Ghost Rider. I love when he's driving straight up a building. That looks rad. The elemental demons have some cool stuff. Whenever you first see him forming in that bar,
Oh yeah,
the dirt guy in particular, pulling himself together from the dirt.
Very reminiscent of Sandman from Spider-Man 3 with just the effort put in.
Looks really good. The water, the guy forming is made out of water.
Yeah,
smoking.
the guy that forming out of water, I just remembered that like he forms and then like flicks off one of his eyes and then it reforms.
That was
just again
cool.
like a little tick and just kind of cool. So just makes them unique, making them different. Yeah, these guys are called the Hidden, I think is what their name was.
Oh, okay.
They're three guys specifically because like they're
he says they hide in the elements is what
they're
Mephisto
earth, water,
says, so.
and air, and then I guess Ghost Rider is fire. So wherever Heart is, then we have Captain Planet. I guess Ava Mendes.
Blackheart.
So Blackheart. So where's Captain Planet in this movie is the real question. But yeah, so a lot of cool effects with those guys. Like I said, by and large, I think the Ghost Rider stuff does look good. Like it's obviously a tough sell because it's obviously got to be CG. You're not practically doing up somebody's face like a skeleton and lighting them on fire.
I saw that apparently Marvel was trying to license this movie like since the 90s, and I'm like, how in the world do you do? I would love to see that. How do you try to pull this off?
No, yeah. Development said they started in like 92 trying to make this into a movie, and you're right. Like, I mean, I guess maybe you look at stuff like Terminator 2, maybe you've got like a starting point as far as like what you can do. But
but fire is hard to replicate.
But fire to not just have fire, but like on a skeleton that looks like it actually can move and do stuff and things like that. Yeah, it's going to be a tough sell no matter what. It's definitely something where I think waiting 15 years definitely was the right thing because now that no matter what you did in the 90s, unless it was James Cameron himself doing it, just because then he would have invented something to do it. Yeah, it's a tough thing to do, but I think by and large, I think it all does look good. Obviously, you do see a little bit of, you can tell that it's obviously 15 years old at this point, but I think by and large, it's not taking you out of the movie though. Like you said, there's no moments where I feel like the movie is like, bad.
Did you also, you have to have this exact same note in your notes here. Did you write down, Jesus Christ, he's ripped?
Oh Jesus! Yes, holy God! There's a
Nicolas
scene
Cage
where he's like
one shirtless scene.
He's in the looking in the mirror. I guess like trying to like scare Ghost Rider out of him or something. Like I don't even really know what he's doing. He's like screaming in the mirror and like clacking his teeth. And like this is the other scene where he goes like a little Nick Cage.
Yeah,
because like he's just kind of hamming it up, but he's got like an 8-pack and like he's just really like I know he's dehydrated as hell in that scene to look like that, but good God,
he's like baby oiled up. Like he came out of the shower, but that's like oil that he has on him.
It's very clearly, but like
I legitimately wondered if it was like fake abs, if it was like like Juggernaut in The Last Stand.
Yeah, just genuinely, and like that scene of him right there, I was like, all right, I guess you could have been Superman 10 years ago. Like that's a moment where I was like, I guess you had the physique. Like
I love whenever actors. I love when actors get ripped, Andrew. No, I love whenever they go all out for characters they really don't have to. Like I've heard that Chris Pratt, when he was cast as Star-Lord, like James Gunn didn't ask him to get fit. He just did.
Right.
Just because like, hey, I'm playing a superhero. Same with like Paul Rudd as Ant-Man. Like no one thinks about Ant-Man as a muscly superhero, but you know, they've got in that movie training sequence where you see like all 15 abs the guy has or whatever. It's like, hey, I did the work. You got to like put one shot in there of me without a shirt on. So
definitely. And yeah, it's Chris Pratt's done that like a couple of times. Like I just remember they kept making jokes on Parks and Rec anytime because he would do that like in between the
fluctuate.
Season,
yeah.
And then he would come back and be like super ripped when he was like kind of, thick before. And it was always just a joke about like, stop drinking beer. But yeah, it's always fun to see. Fun, maybe not the right word, but I appreciate the dedication. Like the idea that like this is something that's so important to this actor, or at least something they're that invested in. They'll get shredded.
They won't take the time to learn how to play play chords on a guitar, but they'll hit the gym.
They'll hit the gym. So Nick Cage, obviously, like I said, this is part that he campaigned for. It shows he's putting in the work, that he really owns that sequence where he transforms. But yeah, getting ripped, real ripped.
Ghost Rider, obvious to me, it reminded me a lot of Scorpion from Mortal Kombat because they both have a flaming skull. That's it. And they come so close to like a direct Scorpion reference. And I'm wondering if it was, but at one point in his Ghost Rider voice, he says, "Come here." And, it's not Scorpion technically says that in the video games, but the one that he's most popular for is Get Over Here. I really wish they would have just leaned into it a little bit more, but I think he's like
even
pulling
has
down
a
a
chain
helicopter.
he can throw. Like, just throw it.
Yeah, exactly.
Playing into it. Do it.
So Curtis Slade, that's the name of Sam Elliott's character, or the caretaker, is it's from the comics. Yes. Was this guy a previous Ghost Rider?
Yes. So the way they play this character in this movie is he's a bit of a combination of two different characters, one of which is a character specifically called the Caretaker. That's obviously where they're taking the name from, and kind of the idea of him just like hanging out at a cemetery.
He's the literal caretaker at his father, where his father is buried.
What a coincidence. What a fun happenstance.
Hey, maybe it's divine intervention, Andrew.
Or what's the opposite of divine?
Demonic intervention.
So Carter Slade, though, is actually the very first Ghost Rider from the comics, introduced in 1967.
Okay.
He wore all white. He is in no way tied to the stuff that Johnny does. He was just a dude who dressed in a white phosphorescent costume, was given his
Andrew,
outfit.
what does phosphorescent mean? I know what it means, but we have listeners that don't know what that means. What does phosphorescent mean?
Really bright.
Okay, thank you.
It's a very, very bright white costume. There's some Native American ties to the original Ghost Rider, but he's not really supernatural. He's not really. It also glows. It's not just bright; it glows. But
yeah,
he's not really. He's really just a genuine kind of like gunslinger type character. There's no powers. There's no really anything supernatural about it. So that's where the name Carter Slade comes from. Retroactively, he has been changed to being called the Phantom Rider. So this character in the movie has obviously taken those pieces from the Caretaker, kind of the idea of the job, the name, all of that.
Okay.
Mixing it with the Phantom Rider, but then just adding that genuine Ghost Rider twist to it.
So sort of like a Iron Man 2 Whiplash situation. We're taking bits from the characters and make a new one.
They do that with a couple of things in this movie. Well, I mean, I'm sure, I don't know if we want to go ahead and just talk about how it works as an adaptation, but his history is another thing where they're kind of taking a lot of pieces and kind of just merging them all together. His father dying is from the comics, and his father's name being Barton Blaze. It's not actually his father's death that drives him to make the deal with Mephisto, though. It is actually the death of Roxanne's father. So in the comics, him and his dad is a stunt cyclist. They work at a carnival, but then his mother and his other siblings, his mom basically leaves with them and leaves Johnny with Barton. His father does die in a stunt. Crash and Mona Simpson, Roxanne Simpson's parents, take him in. Crash Simpson, with a name like Crash, is also a stunt cyclist. And he's the one that ends up having life-threatening cancer that Johnny ends up making the deal with Satan for. And the exact same thing happens. He cures his cancer and then he like immediately dies.
Gotcha.
Yeah, the same kind of stuff where he's like, I only said I'd save your dad from cancer. I didn't say I'd save him from, dying in a crash.
That tricky devil.
So obviously there's a lot of that just gets streamlined for this movie. But again, you're working with time. You're working with
I mean, it sounds like it's all respectful to the source material, which is what the best superhero comics do. Excuse me, what the best superhero comic adaptations do. The best movies.
Yeah, I don't think anything here is really out of the ballpark. I think everything's done with a decent amount of respect for the source material. Obviously, I think Nick Cage has a big semblance for it. Obviously, the big change is like Johnny Blaze is a lot more in your face. Cage is obviously choosing to play him a lot more reserved. And that was something that Cage had even kind of discussed. I think there was an interview where he basically kind of expanded, like, Johnny is not some hard drinking rock star type guy. He's somebody that's actually trying to like mentally kind of
come to terms
with what he's done.
Which is what he does at the end of the movie. He decides that he can harness this power for good because he has the chance to get out of the deal with the devil, but he says no.
That's actually, and that's a kind of a cool moment where, like, he's given the moment to like scot-free, out completely from his deal with the devil, and he chooses not to. Now, I'm not sure why Johnny saying no prevents the devil from just taking Ghost Rider back. I'm not sure why. But
the devil's a cool dude, man. That would be mean.
I get, maybe he sees it as a challenge. Like, he's like, you know what? I'm gonna see how you play this, and we're gonna see how it goes. But no, it's a cool moment, and I think Cage is like, I'm not gonna leave this movie going like, man, I wish that guy were Superman. But Ghost Rider seemed like something that was really set to his wheelhouse, and I think
Nicolas Cage, so for anybody that doesn't know, the man was going to play Superman in the 90s. I mean, so much far that they have a suit, there's a picture out there. The movie just never came to fruition. But
several documentaries at this point, and
he had nice long hair, like 90s Superman. But man, that would I just don't even know what that looks like. The one scene I can picture in my head is in Nicolas Cage Superman, like reacting to kryptonite, going but that's all.
That would have been fantastic. So no, yeah, obviously that if you just search Tim Burton Superman on the internet, you can find dozens of stories, including a very, very long diatribe by Kevin Smith about working with one of the producers on it.
So Curtis Lee, we established that this character is a bit of a deviation or almost a new character based on other existing characters. But man, whenever Sam Elliott says, I think I got one last ride, and his horse transforms and he lights on fire. Yeah. And then what is that? Rawhide, like a remix of Rawhide playing?
And it's Ghost Riders in the Sky.
Yeah, it's some old cowboy song, but they take off across the desert, riding together, motorcycle by horse, leaving trails of fire. I love that shot where they drive by a lizard and the lizard's burned to a crisp and dies. Just a fun little shot. But it's clearly just there to be awesome because Curtis Slade, he doesn't do anything.
He doesn't fight. He literally he rides with him,
shows support.
They stop, hands him a shotgun, and then he leaves. Like that's it at that point. That's all he does. So
he implies that he's hoping God, is going to forgive him and accept him into
right. He basically said he had it in him to transform one last time, and he was waiting for this moment. And yeah, it's a cool moment though. Like I said, you could argue that narratively, it's kind of it's in the movie just to look cool. Really, like it's
and I'm not complaining.
That whole sequence is just so that Carter Slade can give him the shotgun, which is the other notable Ghost Rider weapon, playing into that whole notion of like he like builds his stuff, he builds his look and his weapons over the movie. But it's cool, and like what, like that happens, in superhero movies everywhere. Like Captain America picking up Thor's hammer, like that didn't have to happen, didn't need to happen, but it looked cool as hell. Like it's awesome. Like it's one of those things where like sometimes, especially in these types of movies, it's fine to just do it because it's cool. Like it really is. And that is all that sequence is. Nick Cage and Sam Elliott on fire, riding through the desert. It's just awesome.
They're riding off to the final confrontation with Blackheart. And you talk about, how good the elemental demons look and Ghost Rider looks. Blackheart throughout most of the movie is the low point as far as special effects, because all they really do is superimpose like a scary demon face on top of the actor. Like they don't he doesn't actually transform. It reminds me of like those early internet videos where it's like, look closely at this car, and then like a face jumps out at you to scare you. That's what it reminded me of, his face.
Yeah.
But once he gets the contract and all the souls and becomes Legion, I love whenever Nicolas Cage blows him apart with the shotgun and he reforms as
that was really
demons
cool.
Crawling together. That's the high point of as far as this bad guy.
Yeah, that moment where he becomes Legion is like, that's when he gets at least a semi Blackheart looking face. Like I said, it turns like the dark color. He's got the teeth, like it's got the red eyes. It's that moment is very cool. And like just the idea of like all the souls coming back together, basically like similar to kind of like how Parallax is in Green Lantern, where you can see all the souls. So like he blows apart and you just see them all come back together. Yeah, really cool.
Well, look, all in all, the movie knows what it is and it wears it on its sleeve. Like, this movie is not subtle, and that's okay. That's not even like a criticism or anything, but like if there's an important scene in the movie, it's going to flash back to it 2 more times to make sure that you understood. There's a part where, as a stunt performer, Johnny Blaze crashes a lot, and Mac says to him, and you got an angel looking out for you, and Johnny Blaze says, maybe it's something else.
And he looks in like the window and like a skull comes over his face.
Yes. Lightning strikes. And like whenever he says maybe it's something else, we know what he's referring to. but just in case you don't, here's a strike of lightning and a demon face on top of his face. So like it walks you
It's
through
leaning
it, so.
into it. And
Yeah.
I agree. I think it's very clearly aware of what it is. I think the script is put together with a pretty decent amount of reverence for the source. They're not trying to reinvent the wheel. They're not trying to they're not trying to mess with what works. Nick Cage is obviously coming in with a lot of respect, a lot of desire to play the part. Obviously, apparently he'd been campaigning for this for several years before the movie actually materialized. And it's an interesting period of time too, because obviously this is 2007. So we're pre Iron Man, but we're post Batman Begins, Spider-Man, X-Men at this point. So we're getting ramped up to start taking things to the limit.
If you watch this movie, at the very least, you're going to get some super cool Ghost Rider scenes, and you're going to have a good grasp and understanding of who this character is. And in my opinion, that makes it a successful movie as far as being a comic book adaptation.
Yep, I agree.
Well, that's going to do it for us this week. Now, I'm going to slow it down a little bit here. Normally, I run through these credits in about 10 seconds, but I would like to at least once dive into it a little bit deeper. Andrew, at the time of this recording, and we've been in production on the show for a few months now, but we've actually got a few episodes out there in the world, and we've got some listens and we've got some feedback, and we super appreciate everybody who has done so and the nice things they have said. Andrew, I've seen a lot of people responding to the fact that we are a #positivity podcast. They really like hearing people look for the positives in things instead of tearing them apart, because like we've said, there's enough people on the internet hating on stuff. Let's show it a little bit of love. Yeah.
I agree. It's been nice to hear that. Obviously, that's something that I just heard specifically from some friends the other day, is just the idea that we're looking at things and saying, you know what, we're not trying to pull one over on you. We're not trying to say these are misunderstood masterpieces, but just as our statement goes, not all movies are great,
but every movie has something great.
Exactly. So there's obviously things to enjoy.
We did it backwards. I'm thrown off.
We did it backwards. It's keeping on your toes, but just that notion of looking at things to be like, you know what does work? And that was honestly, that was the pitch I kind of gave you, was just that idea of like it was just a one-line text. And I don't think I even thought anything of it. I just mentioned it to you offhand. And you came back to me the next day or a couple of days later and we're just like, dude, it's in my head and it won't go away. And I'm
like, Andrew, I looked up airplane tickets. I will fly to you. We will record this.
Yeah. I was just like, Chris, I'm not even vaxxed yet. No. And so it obviously resonated with you. And just obviously it was an idea that obviously I had thought of before. And then just seeing like your enthusiasm for it. And then obviously just seeing how has resonated. It's been great. Like I said, just kind of going back and trying to look at things differently. That's something that, not to get too personal here, but that's just literally an approach to everything I'm trying to take, like in life in general now, is just, it's so easy to be cynical. It's so easy to be, it's easy to be negative. We live in trying times. It's very easy to do that. So to not just look at things positively, but it almost forces you to look at things differently as well. You actually have to change the way you think, because it's easy to watch a movie like this and be like, well, this doesn't work and this doesn't work and this doesn't work. But that's not what this podcast is about. It's about looking at what does. So it forces you to focus, look in, and really be like, okay, what is working? And I think,
and I've had a good time revisiting these movies.
Yeah.
I mean, much more than I would have if I were, just catch them on TV.
Just watch it. Yeah,
exactly. So
I'm glad to see that it's resonating. Obviously, to the people that have listened and have provided feedback, thank you. To those that have just listened, also thank you. And yeah, we got a lot more planned, and I hope you guys stick along for the ride.
I've heard people say that listening to the show makes them want to go back and revisit some of the movies we talked about, which I think is fantastic. Because again, we're not trying to tell people these are misunderstood masterpieces, but there's a way to watch these movies, and there's stuff going on here that is enjoyable. Hundreds of people came together and worked really hard to make this movie. You're going to find something to enjoy if you're willing to look for it.
And I've actually found that, like, in some cases, I am getting friends that are like, I've actually always really liked this movie. That happened a lot with Batman Forever. I think there's a lot of people that actually really do enjoy that movie. And so
yeah, your mom is going to love that Judge Dredd episode.
She is. She's very glad that I'm finally going to come around on that movie. But no, it's been great. It's been really good. And like I said, a lot more coming.
As always, we want to thank Mark Benavides for singing our theme song. Now, Andrew, Mark is a mutual friend of ours. We know him as the lead singer of his band Rogues Among Us. which you can listen to wherever you stream your music. Check them out. They've got a great sound. I told him that his vocals and style reminds me of Alien Ant Farm, that first album, Anthology, which is an absolute banger.
Tremendously underrated album. People don't talk about that first Alien Ant Farm album enough.
It's great.
It's like if I go see Alien Ant Farm in concert, it's not ironically.
I saw them a few years ago, in the before times when you could go to see live music, and they were fantastic. It was actually Lit, POD, and Alien Ant Farm, which is my millennial jam.
I was gonna say, like,
show.
I could have left early, but for you, that's just like that's all the peaks for you right in a row.
I did leave early because the headliner with Buckcherry, which is not a band I enjoy, but the other three rocked my face off.
I saw Buckcherry open for Kiss once, so I wish I could have left even earlier.
I'm sorry, Andrew.
I was taking my dad for his birthday, so it's okay.
Well, Mark wants you guys to know that you can follow him on Instagram at not that Mark Anthony. Technically, it's like not that _ Mark Anthony _, but Mark, that is really hard to say on mic. So I'm just going to say at not that Mark Anthony. If you enjoy our show, which, hey, if you're still listening to us talk, I think that means you did. What you can do for us that we would super appreciate is share it with someone else. Look at the movies we've covered. If you know somebody who is familiar with one of those movies, send them that episode and say, hey, check this out. We appreciate the extra listen. We appreciate you taking the time to share our show. It's the only way we're going to grow. Rate, review, and subscribe. It does a lot for the visibility of this show.
You can also follow us on Twitter at BOTRcast. Obviously, if you have questions, suggestions, movies you'd potentially like us to visit, you can always reach out to us there.
Or if you want to hear about movies we are going to cover in the future, sometimes we'll let it slip there what we're working on or releasing next.
We also have an email address, don't we?
Yes. Our email address is bestoftheRestPod@gmail.com. Of course, you got questions, suggestions, everything you're saying, Andrew. You just want to give us some feedback, send it our way. We will certainly read it. Thank you.